Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to Big Little Small Talk. Today I have a special guest with me, Rhonda Weston, AM, Medal of Order of Australia. Now I'm going to read some words out, and I must admit, Rhonda, when I read them, it was all a bit foreign to me, and then I'm going to get you to explain them. So you are the immediate past president of U3A Toowoomba. You are the president of U3A Network Queensland and deputy chair of U3A Australia. You're the only Australian on the international governing board of AIUTA. What does all that mean, Rhonda? And welcome.
Thank you, Megan. Well, as you've said, I'm the immediate past president of U3A in Toowoomba. That was a role that I had for very nearly 13 years, and I was the vice president the year before, and the year before that on a fundraising committee back in the day when U3A in Toowoomba was in a different situation than it is now. So, having said that, when we moved here to retire in 2004, I said to all my friends where we'd lived in the Hunter Valley, I'm not going on any more committees. I've been on committees since I was 14. I'm over them. I'm only doing things that are fun now. And they all looked at me in horror and said, Rhonda, well, how will you ever meet anybody? I said, plenty of things to do for fun in Toowoomba. So I joined U3A, and David and I both did. And for several years, I avoided the committee. And then a set of circumstances led us to join the committee. So U3A struggled in those days in Toowoomba, but I'm always interested in big picture. So for some reason now, which I can't quite remember the exact steps, we joined the Toowoomba U3A joined the Queensland committee. And then, as it happens for some reason, or because I don't know how to say no to somebody, would you take on the president's role, Rhonda? So I did that, and I was a state president 2012 to 2015, did my term and was just a Toowoomba president. But while I was the Queensland president, I was on the Australian committee back in that time and met the international president, and then I was invited to be on the Asia Pacific Alliance U3A committee, and eventually was asked to be the chair of that, which I did for 3 years, and was invited to France to speak at the 40th anniversary of U3A in Toulouse by the world president. And AIUTA stands for the Association of International Universities of the Third Age. And so I became involved with that, and have spoken, I think, at about 7 or 8 international conferences around the world to do with U3A. So I think most people probably know what U3A is, and you did mention it there, that it's the University of the Third Age, but just talk to the listeners a little bit more about what exactly U3A is. U3A was started in France in the 1970s to give seniors in the community the opportunity of lifelong learning. And in Europe, most U3As are conducted in mainstream universities and by lecturers and in the university system. In Australia, when it went to England and then came to Australia, it became community-based, and that's what we have here in Toowoomba and all around Australia. But some universities in Australia are very supportive of their U3A. And so it's just opportunity of lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm. So those people, when it started off in the university, were they taking exams and getting some sort of qualification, or it was more sort of an adjunct type of course that you could do, but you weren't trying to get a degree or something?
Yes, exactly. It was like we say in Australia, more for interest and self-improvement or just to expand your knowledge on something that you mightn't have had the opportunity as a young person to participate in university courses. And so it was for seniors. I think it's expanded quite a lot definitely here in Australia, since those early days in now, it encompasses the whole of the healthy and active ageing and in social inclusion and physical activities, as well as the academic aspect.
Well, I want to keep talking about U3A in a minute and the range of things from the age of the Vikings to pickleball and things that you can do at U3A. But I want to go back, Rhonda, to your early years. Like, you don't seem like the type of person who lived some type of quiet life and then suddenly became the president of the U3A International or whatever you've said that you've been doing. So tell me about where you grew up.
I grew up a farmer's daughter, sugarcane, passion fruit and pineapple on our farm in Nikenbah. And now you're going to say, where's that? If you've been between Maryborough and Hervey Bay, you've passed right through Nikenbah. My family were Danish settlers in that area back in the late 1800s. And my father and his brothers and most of my cousins in those times were all sugarcane farmers. So I grew up on the land. Anyone growing up in the 50s and 60s, life was definitely different than it is now. Very ordinary, I suppose, life. We struggled like most other people. There wasn't too much of anything available in those days. We walked to school from 5 years old, 2 or 3 miles down this dirt track to catch the buses that went down the road. And I often think now, that kids aren't even allowed to walk 200 metres to school unless they've got their phone and they text mum when they get there and all of those things.
Brothers and sisters, Rhonda?
I have 2 sisters, one older and one younger.
Okay, you're the middle child?
Yes, definitely a middle child. And yes, we worked on the farm after school and weekends, same as probably a lot of country kids did in those days.
And you went to school locally. What did you do when you finished school?
Well, I got a job because I guess mostly my upbringing was girls didn't really need a career. You get a job and then you get married. And so I worked at the local marine centre, real estate agent, and then just before I turned 20, I made the really outrageous move and went to live in Brisbane. And so I worked at Queensland Book Depot for a couple of years. Met David while he was there. He was at Amberley doing his national service, as a lot of young men did in those days. And we got married, travelled around Australia. We lived in the West for 8 years. Our girls were born in Rockingham. We did a year in the Pilbara, out in a closed mining town. Spent a day stuck in the desert about 80 k's from Marble Bar when the car broke down. No cars went past for a whole day. Had some interesting adventures over the years.
So were you working in this time? You were travelling around because of David's career, were you?
Yes, yeah. David was in the mining industry at that time. I mostly worked where we lived, and we were a while in Gladstone and up in the Pilbara in Rockingham, and then we had 2 daughters, so in those days Mum stayed at home and I didn't go back to work until our youngest daughter went to school, and by then we'd moved to the Hunter Valley. Okay,
and were you then sort of starting to get on, the school P&C or the local chamber, or starting in committee type work then?
Well, yes, but I'd been doing it before then. When we were young, we were in youth groups, and I was connected with, I can't even remember what it was called back in those days.
Not the Girls' Brigade.
Well, no, we went to junior farmers and the youth group at church and Sunday school, obviously. And yes, and then when my girls went to preschool, I was on the committee at preschool, and then other guides, girl guides. My girls were brownies and girl guides. And after I finished work, many years later, I was the Region Commissioner for Girl Guides in the Hunter Valley. I had never been a girl guide, but my girls had.
So I'm starting to get a sense of how Rhonda ended up having the stellar career with U3A that you did. So you'd sort of taken on these leadership roles and were sort of used to the way executives work and things like that?
Well, yes, and I once when the girls went to school, I had a couple of different jobs, worked for an insurance agent, and then I was given a clerical position at the Australia Meat Holdings, which was the abattoir in Aberdeen in the Hunter Valley, and I'd been there a couple of years working for the engineer, and then, long story, but which I won't bore you with, but I became the purchasing manager and went to night school and got a certificate in purchase and supply, and organised a 100-year celebration, obviously with a committee, of the meatworks in Aberdeen, and I stayed there until overnight they were closed down, like meatworks sometimes are, back in the 90s, and then I waited for David to retire, and we moved here.
Right. And what prompted the move to come to Toowoomba, Rhonda?
Retirement.
And why Toowoomba?
Well, we say that we looked for somewhere to retire to because we didn't come from the Hunter Valley, so we weren't ever going to stay there. And we used to go on holidays, and we say we searched from Bega to Bargara for somewhere to retire to, and could never quite find the right spot. We'd sort of go on holidays and think, would we like to live here? Well, no, not Toowoomba, but... And of course, coming from Hervey Bay, my mum was still alive, so we were passing through Toowoomba, very, very regularly, and we passed through one time and one of us said to the other, we probably could retire here. So we came... Instead of passing through, we'd stay 2 or 3 days at different times of the year, and by the time we came to live here, we actually had about 3 suburbs only that we knew we wanted to live in, and so that's what we did.
And you thought, well, we better get active, and we better go and make some friends, and we better... So what was the first course that you did at U3A?
We moved here in the May, and we joined U3A in the August of 2004. I joined the investment group. We both joined the tennis group. David joined the geology group, and then the next year I joined the belly dance group. Oh. That was just the most fun, Megan, honestly. And understanding behaviour. I've done language classes and Pilates and yoga and Sabashi, which I still do, Sabashi and yoga.
What's Sabashi?
It's like Tai Chi, and all sorts of different activities, history classes, poetry classes. While I'd love to join the music ones, I haven't because I can't sing a note, but I do enjoy music, and we love going to the ukulele concert at the end of term because they just have so much fun. I think over the years, in fact, I was trying to make a list of classes that I've been to, and I think I've been to about 20 different groups over the years.
So while you were, then you started to get involved in the executive, were you still doing courses then?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
The whole time I've been, there hasn't been any year where I haven't done something. I actually, for many years, organised a Dynamic Life lecture series.
Oh, what does that mean?
I had a guest speaker every week, and when COVID struck, of course, that got closed down like everything. But there were 280 people on my class roll, and 200 of them turn up every Monday morning to hear a guest speaker. And several of your colleagues have been, involved in that. And we would have guest speakers from the university or just from the community or interesting people. And some people would say to me, "Oh, well, I didn't think I'd find that interesting, but I came anyway." And they were just blown away by the quality and the interest of these guest speakers. So,
well, I think I did make an appearance as a guest speaker at one of your lectures, and
did.
they were a very good audience, I have to say, Rhonda. They laughed at all my lame jokes, and I thought, yes, I could...
That's right, you did too. I remember that now. You did, yes.
No,
that was a lot of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Rhonda, who decides what courses are going to be offered at U3A? And where do you get the lecturers from?
Everywhere. And because everyone's a volunteer, the way it works for us is that we can only offer the course if we have a suitable person, we call them all tutors, but a lot of them aren't tutors, of course. But if we don't have a suitable tutor or a tutor for a particular subject, activity or craft, well, then we can't offer it. But if someone particularly comes and says to us, or a number of people say, well, I'd really like to learn X, Y, Z, we do our very best to try and find somebody to take that. But of course, that's not always possible.
So was that your role? Someone would come and say, look, I want to learn about the age of the Vikings, Rhonda. Can you find me someone who can teach me about that? And you go out and try and find someone?
Well, no, that was the tutor coordinator's role. And David carried out that role for about 15 years. He is retired as well from that position as well. But we're both obviously, well, we're life members now of U3A and Toowoomba, so which is something totally new.
I'll just remind the listeners that we're in Big Little Small Talk today. We're talking to Rhonda Weston AM, who has just retired as the past president of the local U3A, the University of the Third Age. How do people find out what courses are on offer, and where is the actual U3A building?
Well, U3A and Toowoomba don't own any buildings. We have what we call our home at the Philharmonic Performance Complex in Harristown, and it's a really great relationship and partnership that we have with the Philharmonic Society, because we've been there now, I think, since 2010, and they were, like a lot of organisations, struggling in those days. So we rent rooms there 52 weeks of the year, and probably a third, perhaps a little bit more, of our activities are held there. But otherwise they're held all around Toowoomba, from Crow's Nest, where we have a branch, to Pittsworth, where we have a branch. Schools, church halls, local swimming pools, table tennis association rooms, everywhere that the venue hire is not too expensive, because being a community group and not-for-profit with no government funding whatsoever, we can't afford commercial rates for anything.
Well, you made mention there of the other U3As in the region. I wanted to ask you about that. So when did you expand out of Toowoomba, and was that sort of an initiative of yours, or?
Well, no. There's 36 autonomous U3As in Queensland, and Toowoomba has been active since 1990, and not long after I became the president, Ros Scotney and a gentleman that was working at the council at the time approached us about having a U3A in Pittsworth, and that's how that branch developed. And they are full members of Toowoomba, and realised that it would be to their advantage if they stayed members of Toowoomba instead of becoming autonomous. So that worked really well, and we had a coordinator in Pittsworth. And then about 6 years ago, I think, Crow's Nest wished to have a U3A as well, so it works the same way, and classes are held in Crow's Nest. There's a Crow's Nest coordinator, and in fact that's Penny Pothero, and she has just taken on the role of president of the entire Toowoomba U3A.
Go Penny. So Rhonda, I read that U3A Toowoomba has got 2,200 members, is that right?
That was our number before COVID, but we lost a lot of members when COVID came, and those numbers, about 1,900 now, so not quite built back up to pre-COVID numbers.
And something like 190 classes?
And that was pre-COVID as well, so we're down, I think, to about 150.
So 150 classes are going at the moment?
Yes, most of them are weekly. Some are like lunch clubs and theatre things are monthly, and most things are weekly. Those things are monthly. So most weeks there would be a choice of well over 100 activities that people could do in our area.
Right. It's just an incredible sort of thing that's available for people, isn't it?
It is.
And what's the cost, Rhonda, for people to do things? I suppose it must vary, does it?
Well, membership is $65 a year now in Toowoomba. So that went up just this year because of various things. And hadn't been increased since 2008, Megan. So I said to everybody, if you can tell me something else hasn't gone up since 2008, I'd be happy to hear it. But anyway, people still realise that annual membership is $65, and every year for the last 14 or 15 years, we've been able to offer even an early bird discount on that, so that's really great. And then depending what activity you do, so if you go to an activity at our home at the Philharmonic, it's $25 a term for learning English or Chinese or French or whatever you're doing there. If you play tennis or go swimming or table tennis or something, it would be a different cost because of the venue hire. So
I just can't imagine the sort of logistics of organising all of this and sort of organising the people in the class and the tutors. And do you have any paid staff at U3A?
We do in Toowoomba. We're one of 2 U3As in Queensland. We actually employ a permanent person in the office that just for during the term. So our wonderful office administrator Trish Barrett has been with us now. This is her 10th year, and to have her there every day at the Philharmonic, where we have 4 classrooms, so we could have a couple of hundred. Well, we do actually have several hundred people pass through that complex every week, and so having someone there in our office available who is so exceptional at their job has been a great benefit to U3A and Toowoomba.
You mentioned it just a little while ago about COVID, and I wanted to ask you about the sort of how's the focus on the classes. I wanted to talk about whether there's more sort of mental health classes and whether you felt that COVID drove a more of an interest in that type of thing, the isolation of people not doing their classes and things.
Certainly people were very, very keen to come back because of the social aspect, and I think probably that was the biggest thing that they missed, because if you were studying a language, there were so many ways that you could still do that online while COVID kept us all at home. But,
and did you do that? Sorry to interrupt you. Did you go online with U3A for classes? Ones that could do it?
We did offer, and various U3As around Queensland and particularly Brisbane, they actually offered, I can't remember exact numbers now, but well over 100 classes via Zoom. We were a little bit different, I think, and I think it's partly because of we're country, regardless of whether we're a city or not, we are country. And people come to our classes in their own car. Hardly anyone comes on the bus. We won't go there about whether we've got a bus or not. Certainly no one comes on the train, because we definitely don't have any trains. Whereas in Brisbane, people had to catch public transport because their main U3A is right in the CBD of Brisbane. But here, and so we offered to train our tutors in how to use Zoom and hold their classes if they could. Very few took it up, and the ones that did take it up found it wasn't really their thing or their students' thing. A few sort of persevered, but for the most part, we didn't have too many online here in Toowoomba. And I think other U3As...
I'll just edit this part out. Leroy, just closing the door on the phone call there. So, other U3As?
Yes, perhaps offered more via Zoom mostly. And we haven't probably gone into more classes that noticeably mental health, but I know that we have a number and more participation in classes that deal with meditation and well-being, but not a huge number. So, but I do know for sure that being together with their little group of friends was something that all of our members missed.
You and I have talked about it a few times. A couple of funny stories. One, that my mother used to say that she was going to university. She couldn't quite bring herself to say she was going to U3A. It might say more about mum than but also that my mother-in-law attended singing for fun. So tell us about, you said you haven't been part of the singing group. What's the singing for fun? What do they do? And do they still go, the singing for fun?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the groups that I think started around about, it was before I was on the committee, and I would suggest somewhere 2006 or something like that. And at one stage, well, I think they've changed their location now, so they have a bigger venue. But at one stage, the venue that they had and the leader of the group that they had people on a waiting list for years because no one left, and everyone just had so much fun, and they sang all the old songs. The Singing for Fun group. We've started several other singing groups to try and accommodate those that were on waiting lists for years, and but the Singing for Fun group, they sing all the old songs. People come, and it's just so enjoyable and friendly. They sing for an hour, then they have a break and a cuppa and lots of talking, and then they sing again, and no one ever leaves it. So that was why there's such a long waiting list. But we do have that with a lot of our classes. If we get complaints, the biggest complaint is, I can't get into what I want to do. That's our, if we had to have a whole page of complaints, that would be top, middle and final.
Tell me, what are the sort of some of the, not the weirdest, but what are the most unusual classes that you thought, this will never have anyone participate in this? I mean, you've got philosophy, we talk about pickleball, we talk about being the Wellcamp Airport ambassadors. What are the...
We have had a few classes that haven't really got up and running over the years. One was parapatetics, which we had to look it up ourselves, Megan, to know exactly what it was, and it was people learning about history, but walking and talking and discussing like the old, in the old Greek days, and that didn't really get going. So that was so way out that I think it was just too difficult. The other thing too, even though we have a lot of activity groups, perhaps some of the people who participate and enjoy in the more academic areas perhaps aren't as physically able, so walking and talking was not their thing. If you want to walk and talk, you join the walking group. So that's probably the strangest one. We've had a couple of ones that probably weren't as popular as we thought they might have been, but one that really intrigued me was many years ago. We had a 70-something-year-old gentleman teaching tatting. And most of your listeners are probably saying, well, what on earth is tatting? But the fact, I guess, to me it was strange because in my upbringing men didn't do tatting. Very sexist sort of remark, but that's a fact. And tatting is such a very old craft, so beautiful, but...
It's the making of the lace with those little bead things, isn't it? The wooden things, is that
no,
right?
No. It's a little bit like crocheting. If you're doing very fine crocheting, tatting is even finer than that. And that went for a number of years. But
what was that gentleman's history? Why did he know how to tat?
I think if I remember, he told me his aunt had taught him as a child. And yes, it was fascinating.
So in that instance, would he have approached you and said, look, I'm a really good tatter.
Yes.
Can I teach a class?
Yes, absolutely. Right. And that's really how most of our tutors come to us. Or sometimes, though, we might have a class that's been going for a number of years, and the tutor, for whatever reason, health or whatever, has to step down, but the class doesn't want to stop. We try and get someone from that group, like we did with Singing for Fun, where your mother-in-law participated. When the tutor could no longer do it, someone from the group stepped up. And so some of our tutors come to us that way, but otherwise, I actually got a speaker for my Dynamic Life series from standing in the queue at Qantas check-in at Sydney Airport several years ago, just by talking to people. And so we David and I particularly used to do that if we were at something outside of U3A and you're chatting to people as you do, and if they have a passion or an interest, we encourage them to think about sharing it at U3A.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me, Rhonda, that you might be able to twist people's arm to come and at least give a talk. I mean, it's very, very time consuming, your whole role there. You enjoyed it, obviously, but just got to a point, like all the travel overseas and all of that. Did you love that?
Oh, yes. absolutely. And would never have gone to some of the countries that we did visit because they wouldn't have been on our bucket list. But there was a U3A conference there that I was invited to speak at, and so we decided, well, that's what we're doing with our life, so that's what we're going to do.
What sort of things would you speak at an international conference? Were you bringing an Australian perspective or a Toowoomba perspective, or what sort of thing? Yeah,
because mostly in U3As in Australia operate in the same way. Different areas and different states would offer different subjects, perhaps, because it would depend who was available in their community. But I always spoke, when I was overseas, this is how we do U3A in Australia, and depending what the theme of the conference was, extra things were added at a particular location or conference.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you, Rhonda, about David's role supporting you here. I'll just remind the listeners that we're in Big Little Small Talk with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. We're talking to Rhonda Weston, AM, who needs to tell me about all of her accolades, I guess, in a minute. But I want to find out, because you have been fairly prominent as the president and things, and David, everything I read, David is a behind the scenes, supporting you, making sure everyone's got a chair, everyone's got a drink, how did he go with you having this very prominent job?
Interesting question. He helps in lots of ways behind the scenes. He's very good, for example, at creating beautiful PowerPoint presentations. So if I'd write my presentation, and he would work his magic and turn it into a great PowerPoint. Back in the day when I was doing PowerPoint presentations. And yes, he has always been supportive since we've been involved with U3A in the roles that I've taken. He's happy to drive the car anywhere. If you say, oh, there's a conference that I have to go to in Townsville, well, you don't want to fly, Rhonda, we should drive, or whatever the location might be. So that's usually helpful to me for him to be doing that. And as you said, just there, making sure the technology works, which is good, and tossing around ideas. Probably over the years, his biggest complaint might be what we're going to talk about at breakfast, because it'll be something I thought of at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so that's our topic for breakfast. Yes.
I don't want to sort of put too fine a point on it or make it a big deal, but you did say before, that's a sexist thing to say, and maybe it's sexist of me asking the question, but a lot of men maybe don't like their wives being very busy and being in that supporting role, and I guess it's a little bit unusual, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose it is. David is probably, and he would tell you this as well, probably more of a behind the scenes person. He's not very interested in standing up in front of a room full of 600 people and giving a presentation. Mind you, had you asked me to do that in the early 90s, I would have just hidden under the table. But now, I don't even think about it now.
And are you surprised by how you've grown as a person, or having such a huge role in an international role like that? Like, if someone had have asked you when you were 40 whether you were going to do something like that, or did you always just think, I've got a big sort of career up ahead of me? Didn't think about it?
Not for 1 minute, never, even though I've been working on committees, as I said earlier, most of my life, and I've probably mostly been secretary or president or something of the sort, but no, never for 1 minute did I think I would be speaking overseas or even travelling overseas, to be quite honest. Although we had travelled overseas a bit before U3A, but no, never occurred to me. And even when we came here, it never occurred to me to think that I would be doing that. As I said, I wasn't joining any more committees. I was just going to do things for fun.
tell me about getting the Medal of the Order of Australia. How does that work for people who don't know? And you get nominated by someone?
Someone nominates you, yes, and then it's quite a process and can take a number of years from the nomination to the actual award. If you know, I got no idea how many people get nominated and don't receive one, and then I was very surprised after I did receive one a number of weeks to find that there's a whole Order of Australia association, and we have a Darling Downs branch. So when you think you know things, don't know anything.
You haven't taken that on and started organising, catch-ups or anything like that with your fellow AMs or OAMs?
They do have such a twice a year, or at least twice a year, they have morning teas here in Toowoomba for the Darling Downs recipients. So that's really great because you chat to other people and...
So, I mean, you've had that and you've had sort of Citizen of the Year and all of those. Like, are you sort of surprised by that, or you just have taken it all in your stride, Rhonda?
Well, surprised when it happened, and because in 2019, David and I were Citizens of the Year and Region Citizens of the Year. That was a huge surprise. Something that you never ever expected or thought I would be receiving any accolades of that sort. I was always sort of an average student at school, and nothing really outstanding in the way of academic qualifications or any of those things. So to receive, it's really very humbling, I think, to receive awards of that calibre, and yes. You do get over it, though, I suppose.
You don't believe your own publicity, you reckon?
Well, right, and I suppose you don't think about it very often is probably what it's not something that you think about.
You're not getting upgraded on a flight or anything like that?
No.
Oh, disappointing. What about your girls, Rhonda? What did they go on to study with such a dynamic set of parents?
Well, we have one daughter who lives here, and our one grandson's still here. We have two grandsons. And we have a daughter in Melbourne, and she's a missionary, and she has been in that role pretty well ever since she left school. She's travelled to Malaysia and Samoa and South Africa, and now, says her mum, thank goodness, she's safely in head office in Melbourne and in Australia. So that's what our eldest daughter has done, and our youngest daughter has been a mum, and she's still here. Her youngest now is a teenager. So,
was faith a big part of your? You mentioned that you went to Sunday school and you went to church. Is that a big part of your life?
It was growing up. Yes, all of our cousins and everybody. Pretty well, church was and Sunday school were a part of our whole upbringing, and we participated and were involved in a church in the Hunter Valley, and Christina has continued working in the mission area with her organisation. So I don't belong to a church here in Toowoomba.
You've come to the right place for joining a church. It's full of churches.
It
That's
is
right.
Indeed, yes.
What are the? Let's just go back to U3A for a second. I wanted to ask you before. Is there sort of, for people who are listening and thinking, oh, that sounds great, there's got to be something there for me. Is there a span of age groups? I want to ask you, or is it mostly people who have retired, or sort of young mums, or anything like that?
No, it's University of the Third Age, and the broad definition of third age is your first age is you're a child. Your second age is that you're a young adult raising children, and your third age is immediately that you retire, and long before you get to your fourth age.
Oh, what's the fourth age? Is that the one where you're pushing up daisies?
Well, no, it's probably when you're, in the care of Brodrib or somebody like that, or perhaps housebound because of your age and your ability, your mobility and whatever. I remember years ago I was at a conference and Professor Barry Jones, I'm sure everyone remembers who he is the patron of the Australian U3A, and he was heard to say that he's going to spend as much time as possible in his third age, and if he has to spend 10 minutes in his fourth age, that'll be too much.
That's right.
And I think that's really brilliant.
Yeah.
So,
but if there's younger people who want to come along, you're not saying, no, you can't come. Yeah.
Because we only do things during the day, and you have to be in your third age to belong to
you do?
U3A.
You are?
Yes.
You are saying no, you can't come.
Pretty
Rhonda,
well,
that's
yes.
not ageist, is it? Are we allowed to be ageist and reverse age, ageism?
Well, there's a whole lot of debate about it, but and most of our programs are for seniors. Well, all of our programs are for seniors, and you have to be able to participate in them to be able to attend.
The reason I ask is my sister thought that she'd like to join a singing group, but she didn't want to go somewhere where it was all too serious, and she went to this group the other night in New Farm, and she got in there and they said, are you a soprano or a alto, what some of the other things are? And she said, I didn't even know what I was, and they start off and they were very serious, and she realised that she was in the wrong place. But I guess people do want to do things like singing for fun, or
And we do have chamber singers at our U3A, and a lot of the U3As do. So if you just want to have fun singing, then go to Singing for Fun or Dinky Die Bush Ballads or Sing Along. There's a number of those singing groups that are wholly and solely just to enjoy yourself. But chamber singers is for serious people who would know whether they were altos or sopranos or whatever, which isn't me. But they've been going. I think chamber singers have been going all the years I've been a member of U3A, to be quite honest.
Oh, Rhonda, it's so fascinating. I also want to know, what did David do? Or did David do the belly dancing class with you?
Yeah. Oh, no. That was back in the day. That was the only, or a class, or probably the only class, where men were not even allowed in the room. And the tutor at the time, she was quite definite about that. So it was all ladies, where I don't think we have any other classes where we make that. Can't think of any at the moment.
Just thinking about that, I was thinking, is it to do with privacy? But do you have a lot of, or many migrants and refugees who come to U3A?
Not a huge number, but we do have some. Probably more in things like Tai Chi, languages. We actually have a gentleman who came to Toowoomba late last year, I think it was, and he's Italian, and so he's come along. He offered his services, and he's come along now, and he goes to one of the Italian classes, and actually only speaks to them in Italian, and that has made a huge difference and interest in the class. And we've been very fortunate this year as well, because for a number of years, or for a short time, our Japanese class didn't have a tutor. But we now have a lovely lady who's Japanese, and she's, reinvigorated the whole Japanese class. But one thing we do with our Japanese class just reminded me that the Toowoomba sister city, Takasaki in Japan, they visit U3A several times when they come out to Toowoomba for whatever reason they come for. They're counsellors, and so because of various interaction and visits backwards and forwards, and David and I were very fortunate to be invited to visit them at their council in Takasaki when I was co-hosting a conference in Osaka. And to come out of that has been a joint class several times a term for our Japanese class here in Toowoomba, to meet via first Skype and now it's Zoom with a group of Takasaki people who are learning English, adult, like a seniors English class. So they have this combined meeting every I think it's about 2 or 3 times a term.
Well, listen, I'm just running out of time, unfortunately, and there's a couple of things that I want to ask you. Rhonda, what's the worst piece of advice someone has given you, do you think?
Do you know, I think go back to something I mentioned touched on briefly a little while ago was that when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, girls got married, they didn't need a career. And to me, well, it's probably not so much advice. I suppose it's advice in a way, but I think that that's something that is just so not heard of in today's society. And had I been growing up now, it would be totally different.
That's true, yes. We've come a long way.
We have,
whether we're there yet. What about the worst piece of advice you might have given someone? Can you think?
No, I don't actually think I go around giving advice. So I don't know. Perhaps you should ask my daughters.
Could be too. Well, sort of on the theme of that, who do you think in your life has been the most influential person in your life?
I don't actually know that one particular person had, but when we were growing up, we had two great aunts who, for various reasons, lived for something like 50 odd years after their parents had passed away. They had never worked because they were, born in the late 1890s but because they were single ladies, they lived together. They were like extra grandmas, I suppose. They were very gracious ladies, very quiet, and they loved me unconditionally. And if I looked back, those two ladies who I loved dearly, and in fact I named our eldest daughter as one of their second names, they were two ladies who I think influenced me greatly. They were independent, they were quite elderly, both in their 60s when I was born.
Oh, elderly.
But for many, many years they travelled. They'd just hop on a train and go to the Blue Mountains from Hervey Bay, and they were independent, but they were just such gracious ladies. I think their influence was really important in my early years. In my latter years, one of David's aunties, she was a really special lady, and many a time when we've sat and chatted, I often think back on her and her life and how she lived her life. So two great aunts and one of David's aunts.
Yeah, so the two great aunts, what were their names?
Phoebe and Ruth Pop.
Okay. And were they, you mentioned earlier that, was it Dutch heritage?
Danish.
Danish. Were they?
They were German. They were
German.
I have Danish and German ancestors, and they were from my German ancestry, with a name like Pop, of course. Yes.
It's a lovely story. It's lovely to think of you as a young girl and going and seeing the aunts. And so they lived near you on the farm, did they?
Oh, they lived in Hervey Bay. We lived in Nikenbar, which was in those days 5 miles, so whatever that is nowadays. But we used to visit them regularly every second Sunday afternoon, and my elder sister and I often spent several weeks there in the Christmas holidays. They were always there after school, or yes, just amazing ladies.
Well, as I say, I'm running out of time, but that sounds like another volume of this podcast, because as you say that, I think, what did they cook? How did they spoil you? Did they teach you to sort of not tat? I wouldn't imagine, but so I'm going to leave that for now. Rhonda, who is your most favourite royal person? Do you have a favourite royal person?
Well, I'm not a really big royalist, but I would say that almost any Australian female would have to say Mary, because if you come from an ordinary background and take on what she has taken on, and she is just so perfect at what she does, learned a new language, left home, all the things that just blow your mind. She would have to be my favourite royal.
That's a perfect answer coming from you, Rhonda, I think. All the qualities that you admire, you embrace yourself, I think. Yeah. So, Mary it is then. And now I would imagine, apart from belly dancing, you've probably done they have ballroom dancing classes at U3A?
They have old time dancing, yes. But David, not being a country boy, he doesn't do old time dancing, or pretty well any dancing, but we do have old time dance, yes.
Okay. Well, put that aside for a minute. If you're somewhere at a wedding or something and they put this song on, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Do you know, I think any music or any song that Susie Q sang, when I was a volunteer at the Empire Theatre when we first came here, every time she came to town, I used to either volunteer or go and see her. And she is just so vibrant and fun-loving and full of life, and I don't think you could not dance or toe tap or something when she was performing or singing.
A bit of Devil Gate Drive, you think?
And
she used to come a lot to Toowoomba, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Yes.
That's another thing that COVID might have... Susie Quattro still lives around?
I think so. Yes, she's only our age. My age, you're probably younger than me. Yeah, I think I remember looking up once and finding she was about the same age as me.
Oh, isn't that brilliant with those leather pants?
I know.
So Susie Quattro. Well, Rhonda, that is another surprising answer. I didn't think that you were going to tell me Susie Quattro, but I love it.
Oh,
it's
okay,
beautiful.
good.
I've really enjoyed having a chat with you today and finding out the drivers, the motivators that not only your career before U3A, but where you got to with U3A and the incredible job that you've done here. So
thank you.
Thank you for being my guest on Big Little Small Talk, Rhonda.
It's been my pleasure, Megan. Thank you for asking me.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.